Dr. Carolyn, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to be here and connecting with you. And I can see you, the listeners can't, but it's just nice to be able to see you and talk to you face to face instead of just over the phone.
Isn't it? It actually is really nice. And I feel like it changes the dynamic of the conversation when you can actually see someone and their reactions. And,
Yeah.
if you are listening to this, we do have this full video on YouTube. So you can go and see both Dr. Carolyn and I, which is always lovely as well. Okay.
Great.
So my first question this is my favorite place to start. It's kind of the whole integrity and theme of the show. I really want to know, what does happiness mean to you?
Right. So that's a loaded question, right?
Mm.
Because I think there's so much around the idea of toxic happiness and this pressure in our society to be happy. And in my experience, and I think it's probably true for a lot of people, when I am most content, I am at my most authentic. And when I'm at my most authentic and I'm actually living what's true for me inside, then I have a lot of ease and contentment and natural joy. It's sort of like going with the flow of life instead of resisting the flow of life, if that makes sense. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, there's this great teacher. In fact, I quote him in my book, Adi Shanti. He's a spiritual teacher, and he talks about how ego is the resistance to what is. And I think about that all the time. Like, what is happening in my life? Am I resisting what's being presented to me as a potential opportunity, or am I going with it because my authentic voice inside of me is guiding me forward? And when I can follow that authentic voice, I'm happy. And that's the only way to say it. And because when I follow that voice, I'm content, I'm at ease, I have a willingness to sort of move with the flow of my life rather than resist any part of the flow of my life. And then I can be what some might consider happy. Right. And
I
that's what
love that.
happiness is for me. Yeah.
I love that answer so much. And you've touched on so many themes that we're going to explore in this conversation together, and especially about your book, which we're going to talk about. And what I love so much that you said in there, and I guess maybe this question is more of a personal question, if you will, something that I've been battling in my own mind for the last little bit, is we put all of these conditions on our happiness. I think it's either right or wrong, it's yes or no, it's good or bad. And you can be presented in a situation, and either one of those paths could be the quote unquote right path, but it's about knowing who you are inside of yourself in order to be able to make the decision that is the best decision for you. With that said, we use the word, or the words rather, trust your intuition, listen to your inner self. But how do we actually do that? Because, I'll just throw a little more context on this as well. How do we actually do that? Because we are so ingrained with stories from other people. Other people tell us what is right or wrong based off of their own lived experience. So, how do we figure out what is just noise, what is our own truth, and then how do we make a path moving forward that way?
Absolutely. So there's so much you just asked
I
me.
know.
And, but so simple, all of this is outlined in my book, The Guidance Groove, but I'm going to give an example. So I opened the book with this story of a friend of mine who's a former Navy SEAL, and he was in a combat zone in Iraq as a contractor, and he spent an entire day being there. He was supposed to be helping guard the U.S. military operation or U.S. government operation there, and he was spent a whole day being shot at and bombs thrown at him and whatever. And I said, well, what got you through that day and everyone around you? And he said, well, I just followed my instinct the whole day because I had all this training and I followed my instinct and it got me out of it. And everyone survived that day because he was following his instinct, right? And so that's a really clear example. When we're in a fight or flight experience, we kind of just go instinctual and we go or we fight. So then I talked to, his name's Chris, he's in the book. I talked to him and he said, well, I said, how does that translate to your daily life? And he tells me the story about a woman he met who he just fell crazy for, was in love with her. And he, at the very beginning, the very outset, his instinct was screaming at him, she will never trust you. This won't work out. But he went forward anyway. He ignored that voice inside of him because she was beautiful and interesting and smart and had lots of money and fulfilled all these sort of other things that were more mental. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, why did you follow your instincts when people are shooting at you, but you didn't when it comes to potential partnership? And so that's just kind of a very basic example. Hopefully we'll never be exposed to having to run for our lives or defend ourselves. But that's just a basic example of, we all have instincts. We are animals. Animals have instincts. They follow them. We all have that voice. And I think if you're listeners and you just spend 1 second thinking, when is an experience in my life where I've been faced with a decision, it can be small or big, when did I have a full body yes or a full body no when faced with that
Mm-hmm.
experience or that decision? And we've all had them, right? We've all had them. I've taught this book as a seminar at UC San Diego, where I'm a professor. And so I know my students are all like, oh yeah, I know what that is. That is the experience of feeling your intuition and
Mm-hmm.
feeling your guidance when you have those full body yes or full body no experiences. Now imagine if you felt for that confirmation with every decision, including like, it's morning, do I get up or do I rest for a little bit longer? Do I exercise?
Mm-hmm.
What do I have for breakfast? How do I view my work life? Who am I going to call? Who am I going to relate to today? Do I spend my evening with this person or alone? Do I need this or that? And so it's a constant checking in with yourself. And at first it's hard because, as you said, we have these stories that we have in our brain, these loops, these stories. And in the book, I categorize these stories into 4 categories that make up our unproductive groove. So we have the guidance groove, which is you grooving to your own, dancing to your own music of your own groove and really being your most authentic self. And then we have these unproductive grooves of inadequacy or obligation or scarcity or unworthiness. And when we listen to the stories that build those grooves, then we tend to ignore our intuition, or we tend to not believe our intuition when it's guiding us a certain way. And the only way to feel into and recognize and trust your guidance is to start to notice, am I listening to the story that I've made up in my brain that's not true, that makes me seem like I'm inadequate or unworthy? Or am I really getting in touch with what's actually in my body, in my
Mm-hmm.
soul, in my spirit, in whatever that is that the intuition is coming from? And it's a matter of quieting your brain, feeling down into your entire self, and then interacting with the world from this place of wholeness. And the more you do that and find your intuition and then listen to it and then follow it, and you see the outcome, maybe write it down. What was the outcome when I followed my intuition? What was the outcome when I followed my guidance? What was the outcome when I ignored my guidance? And start to keep a journal. And then we can build up data. I'm a biologist, I'm a scientist, I'm a conservation biologist in my professor life.
So
And
cool.
we rely on data, right? We rely on data. How is the world working? We need to collect data. You're also collecting data about yourself. Am I listening to my stories in my head, or am I feeling into my intuition? What happened? Let me write that down. Next time a big thing comes up, or even a small decision, let me go back to my journal and see, did I listen? What was the outcome? And the more data you amass as you listen to your intuition and trust it and follow it and find it, the more you can trust it more and follow it more and get to that place of being your most authentic self. Because
Mm-hmm.
that's what really your guidance or your intuition is offering you, is an invitation to your most authentic self. And when you can hear it and find it and trust it, live by it, then you start to have that ease and contentment that I talked about at the top of the show, that leads to increased joy and happiness. And one more thing about that, this whole concept of guidance groove is predicated on this idea that we are all radiant beings inside, right? All of us are the same like spark of radiance. And usually what happens is we create these stories that just kind of junk up our radiance and our authenticity and that beautiful spark that is Carolyn, that is Simona, that is us, and those stories are the junk that kind of accumulate over our radiance. And you sort of have to take out those pieces one at a time and start tossing them by the wayside. That's junk. I don't need to believe that. That's junk. I don't need to believe that. And keep finding that inner peace and place that is constantly helping to guide you. And we all have it. I mean, it's everywhere. So I know it can be accessed. Does that all
Mhm.
make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. And as I put in, as I had said a lot of different things, so did you. And there's so many different ways we could take this conversation from there. And one thing I was thinking about as you were speaking is it even comes down to, so like in my professional life, I produce podcasts. That's what I do. It's my company, it's my business. So, I mean, I know I'm hosting this podcast, but one thing that I've realized makes someone, even a good interviewer, for example, or be able to like roll off the cuff and ask good questions and navigate a conversation, that's all intuition based. You don't know
Yes.
what a situation will be like,
Yeah.
in until you're in that moment. And one thing that I've learned for sure about myself, and I see this mirrored in what you're saying, is in a lot of areas of my life, I feel like I've, really dialed in and been able to make really sound decisions out of intuition. And then there's other parts of my life that are so fear induced that are almost paralyzing. So, how can you take that ability to make those sound decisions and know that you can have intuition and you can trust it, and also leverage that for really hard moments of your life?
Yes, like the fear. So all of those unproductive grooves I talked about, they're motivated by fear. And
Mm,
there's specific fear. Each chapter that I go over the unproductive grooves, I start with the fear motivator for each of those unproductive grooves. So inadequacy, if that's your unproductive groove, say with your work life, then that means you have a fear of revealing your potential inadequacies to the outside
mm,
world and maybe even to yourself, right? So people who believe that they're inadequate to a task before them and they're afraid it will be discovered, they bluster and they obfuscate and they put attention onto others. They try to draw attention away from themselves because they don't want to be discovered as inadequate, right? And that leads to all of these sort of insecurity, typically insecurity behaviors.
mm,
And so once you can sort of understand the fears that are underlying your inauthentic behaviors, you can start to go toward them. I kind of think of it as you swim toward them and you're going toward the muck at the bottom of a really gross pond. You're like, ooh, who wants to go there? Well, you have to go there if you want to find what's underneath that muck. You just
totally.
have to. And so you go
Totally.
toward that fear. Why am I afraid? What is causing this fear? Well, maybe it's because your parents told you every day for 20 years that you were shit or you were
Mm-hmm.
inadequate in some way. So that is something you're going to have to face and excavate and find arguments to remove that voice
Mm-hmm.
and really realize that once you remove the muck of that training that you were given, then you'll discover that radiance, right? And that's your authentic self. And same with, or unworthy. The unworthy groove is a really intense one. Something has made you believe that you are actually unworthy of the most basic human joys and love and acceptance and beauty. And you got to go toward that and figure out what has created this pattern, these thoughts in my brain that are convincing me that I'm unworthy. And that's the piece that I think is difficult for people, is to recognize when their inauthentic thought patterns are not true, and then
Mm-hmm.
try and discover what the fears are that are motivating your adherence to those unproductive groups. What do you think you're protecting? What do you think you're protecting yourself from? And when you can go toward those fears with love and compassion and curiosity and no shame, and you can start to kind of excavate them and make them a little bit smaller, and then you can feel your authentic self more easily over and over and over again. And
Mm-hmm.
all the fears are kind of specific for the unproductive groups, but they all really just boil down to, we are afraid to be our softest, most vulnerable, most exposed selves. And what happens when we're our most authentic selves? We're our most vulnerable selves, right? Because we're
Mm-hmm.
not hiding, we're not creating artifice, we're not building a wall, we're not presenting a false front, we're just being ourselves. And there might be consequences to being yourself. People might
Mm-hmm.
not like that. People might be inconvenienced when you step out of the obligation groove and listen to what you need, what you need to be doing. And that's okay. You can still set your benevolent boundaries and keep moving toward more and more authenticity, and accept that people might not like you, but other people might like you
Exactly.
more. And you'll have these connections with yourself and with other humans that are deeper and more sustaining and
More
um,
fulfilling.
yeah, more fulfilling, definitely. So
Yeah.
that's a lot to say about fear, and how
Mm-hmm.
strong the fears can be,
Mm-hmm.
and how a lot of the time we didn't even create those fears. They were handed to us, by
Exactly.
our inheritance from our parents, our grandparents, and
Exactly.
just our society and ourselves. So then we
Exactly.
take that on.
Exactly. That's so accurate. And I love so much everything that you said there. And what sticks out to me is, we all have fear in life, and we all have fear of some kind of fear in life. For myself, and I've talked a lot about it on this podcast, I have a fear of loss and I have a fear of being alone.
Yeah,
And so when you pair those two together, though, they're like oil and water almost, because they don't, in my mind, it's hard for them to stick. It's kind of like a catch 22. You're scared to be alone, but you're scared to lose what you have,
yeah,
but you're scared to be alone. You know what I mean? In whatever sense of the word that might be, right? And so it's like, how do you start to uncover what those different stories are? And then once you
yeah,
realize, I think that part of the journey and part of the purpose of being here on this earth, living this life. I'm a pretty spiritual person, so I like to go to the woo, and I'm thinking you're coming there with me. I mean, you have to be into the woo to be able to have a conversation like this. But I think
yeah,
too, I was chatting with a friend yesterday, and we were talking about how important it is to be, able to see and discover what all of those different fears are, know their place, and then also understand how they're serving you to continue to grow and to continue to flourish in your path in life, right?
yeah,
So I just think that this is all so incredible. And what I love that you said there too is that you're kind of, you said it without saying it, but you're looking for the proof, which makes a lot of sense, especially given your background and what you teach. And before you said that you were, a professor in biology, I actually was like, wow, how cool would it have been when I was in college and university to have learned about a topic like getting in tune with your intuition? Like
yeah,
that would be such an amazing course to take, because I think it's a life skill that we never get to learn unless we're forced into it, and we're, we have to, like, we just have to learn it in order to survive, right?
absolutely. And it's so funny because I'm a biologist, and I do teach biology. Mostly I teach ecology, evolution, and conservation biology. And
Ooh.
we're perfectly comfortable talking about animals having this intuition to migrate. Like birds, certain birds migrate like a bazillion miles every year, right, back and forth, or
Right.
like whale migrations. And we don't know what that comes from. In science, we have not discovered where the instinct to pick up and migrate, like what's the trigger exactly, what allows them to get to where they need to go. We're not exactly sure how that all comes together to work. And yet we never talk about humans in that same way. We also
Mm,
have instincts. We also have this thing that I'm calling guidance. There's a ton of names for it. And you don't have to be spiritual to know that you have this inside you.
mm,
Personally, I have no idea where my guidance comes from, but I'm 100% open to it being physiological and biology related. And I'm also 100% open to it being some path that's open to me, that is given to me from the universe. And I'm tuning into that universe wavelength or frequency, maybe. I have no idea, but that doesn't really matter. All that matters is that you allow that frequency, that guidance, that spidey sense, whatever you want to call it, to be taken as seriously as you move through your life as you would the logical stuff that's happening in your brain. And I
mm-hmm,
think that what you said about learning this as young people or in college, it's a matter of giving people permission to use all of their bodies as they're moving through the world, and their feeling selves and their physical selves. Your physical feeling self is just helping you get more data about what's happening in the world around you. Everyone's gotten a prickly feeling or a bad feeling or a good feeling, right? When you're
Mm-hmm.
faced with a person or an event or an experience. Why would we throw that out and only rely on the stuff that's in your brain that's quote unquote logical? Well, it's because society gives a lot of value to that logic, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we've taught you, you just said you're into the woo woo. Well, a lot of people have discounted that, right?
Yeah.
They don't give it any. I'm an atheist, I'm an agnostic, whatever, don't give me that woo woo crap.
Yeah.
Well, why would you throw that out when there are literally millennia of traditions exploring these ideas in such a deep and beautiful way that might be useful for actually navigating the world? The brain is
Exactly.
great for solving problems and for deciding things and all kinds of great things, but it's only part of your toolbox, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you learn that you can quiet what your brain is insisting is true, quiet that down, question the validity of it, and incorporate your whole self, that's a revelation for a lot of people, that they can
Mm-hmm.
give themselves permission to experience life from that place of wholeness. And it doesn't even require belief in anything
Anything.
bigger.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's nice if you have that belief, there's something lovely about it, but it's not required.
It's not required. And I love that so much because sometimes you can't actually put a tangible description on what that particular thing is. And maybe years from now, you figure out what it is, or you figure out, what that particular thing was, what that moment was telling you, and so on, so on. So, one of the things that I have learned a lot about myself by, just getting in touch with, my own intuition is, and also, I don't know if you're familiar with like the study of human design and different modalities, like energy healing modalities and stuff like that. But if you're not, are you familiar with human design?
I'm not human design, but
Okay.
definitely energy work and whatnot. But yeah, explain more.
Okay. So human design is actually really cool. It's a really like interesting concept. It's, essentially we're all made up of this specific design, okay? And it's based off of where the planets were in conjunction on the day and time and place you were born. So similar to astrology, but it has like a few different ideologies. I don't really know too much about it, but I've had a few, experts, human design experts on the podcast before. And one thing that I learned through running my own human design chart, if you will, it gives you this opportunity to see things from a completely different lens. So, as you know, you have chakras, right? Like in different healing work, you have your chakras. So, it models the idea of chakras. And what it does is it takes all of these centers and it either tells you if those are defined centers or if they're open centers. And when they're open, it means that you can take in information more fully. So sometimes people can, hear something that somebody else is saying and be like, you know what? That's not for me at all. And then some people are like, wait, hold on. Why? So that's the difference between, and from my understanding, the difference between having an open and a closed, like, head center, let's say. Some people are like, allow information to flow through, and it can be a little bit confusing to know, is that true for me, or is it actually truth, or, is it just something that is made up? But what I learned through that whole process is that I personally am someone who makes decisions based out of emotions. So my emotions, so I don't get gut feelings. Like I don't get like, that little hit in your gut that most people get when something is, quote unquote right or wrong. I get full body emotions if something is good or if something is bad. I get chills, like all of that. And so, but where it makes it complicated, and you were talking about, our brain and our brain making decisions for us, where it gets complicated is that the heart and the brain and the emotions all want something different based off of all of the experiences that they each have. So, I guess my question in here for you is, what are those signs that you can look for that you're trusting that inner voice versus stories and other conditioning that other people may have put onto you?
I'm so happy you said that thing about the emotion, because the feeling, I sort of say the feeling self, but I
Mm,
mean emotions and so emotion and experience, it's all also felt, it's felt in the brain, it's felt in the body, right? And so you said you get chills, you get the full body yes, the full body no. All of those are data. That is perfect. That's a feel that your body is an antenna, that you're picking up signals from your environment and your choices before you to help you decide which way to move forward. You're
mm,
getting physicalized manifestations of yes or no. right? And so sometimes, and I have those same things, and sometimes you'll get your body telling you, your emotions telling you, I've got to make this choice this direction. But your head is saying, but that doesn't make any sense. If I want
Yeah.
to make partner or whatever, or date this person or do whatever, I need to go in this direction, which is opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you go into your body and you say, this is what I do. And I do it on my bicycle a lot because I love to bike on in the early morning. And I'll create scenarios in my brain for big decisions. And I'll feel, how does my body, my actual physical body and my emotional self, how does it feel when I recreate the scenario or create the scenario of option X in my brain?
Mm.
Ooh, that's kind of making my tummy hurt. That's kind of making me feel heavy. It's giving me a little bit of anxiety. It feels off. Okay, now how do I feel in scenario? Why? Well, gosh, I feel a little lighter. I feel a little freer. I feel a little more certain. My body, my stomach ache kind of went away. Those are the data points that you gather, and you're like, well, gosh, it still doesn't make intellectual sense, and I'm going to choose this path that makes me feel better. So I need to do a little more research. I need to get my brain convinced that this is not the silliest thing that I'm ever going to do. And sometimes, so then you kind of do a little bit of research to help your logical self catch up with your emotional self, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes you just have to leap and trust. You
True.
just have to say, my body has a slight stomach ache for a reason. I'm going to go with the option B that's not giving me a stomach ache, and I'm going to see what happens. And you can practice, like, everyday life gives you a billion chances to practice this whole idea and experience. Okay, what am I going to have for breakfast? What feels better? Well, I really love donuts from VG's Donuts, but I know that's going to make me feel bad. And it's not even necessarily like for body image. Maybe it's bad to put sugar in your body first thing in the morning. It makes you feel bad, but you really want it, right? But your guidance is like, it would be better if I have an egg or something else, whatever. And so you have a million choices. And then the other beautiful thing is, if you have a belief system like I do, where truly every single thing happens that's exactly perfect, then you make the quote unquote wrong decision. That's just called missing the mark. You've just missed your mark. Okay, the stomach ache's persisting. It clearly wasn't quite, I missed the mark there. I'm going to try again. And again, all throughout your day, you get a million choices to try again, really a chances to try again. So it kind of removes this like right or wrong. Like, say you choose the job based on the logic that you're going to make more money, you're going to be more powerful, blah, blah, blah. And you get 3 years into it and you're like, holy shit, what the hell? I should have listened to that stomach ache. I'm going to quit this and go back to what I really wanted to do that doesn't give me the stomach ache, but makes me feel more alive. Great. Then it's not that you made a mistake for 3 years. It's you've now learned something about yourself. You've learned that those data you collected 3 years ago were actually telling you something worthwhile. And maybe it took you 3 years to figure it out. But then the next time, maybe it only takes you 3 days to figure it out, or 3 minutes or 3 seconds. Because you just start to see what happens when you go with the stories in your brain, or you go with your feelings that are emotional or body and your brain. It's not your brain's not this sad thing that we have to just throw on the curb. It's this beautiful, beautiful thing that creates everything. But you just have to know when to give all your other sensations equal power with those that come from your thoughts that might not be true.
Oh, I love that. That's so
Does that help a
beautifully
little
put.
bit?
Yes, yes. Oh my goodness. This is just I love this conversation so much. And you know what's interesting? As you were chatting, I was like, you know what? Like I think a lot when people speak and say things. It's not because I'm not listening. It's just like, oh wow, that is just such a good point and it triggers something in my mind.
Mhm.
I even do this with podcast guests. Like when I bring someone on the podcast, I don't do any research. You know what I mean? And I know that's a terrible thing, because a lot of the times people will go through and, there's certain criteria and stuff like that. My only criteria for bringing someone on my podcast is that they will share the conversation with their community. That's literally it, because I want people to be able to hear all of the magic. And also, why would you not? You know what I mean? Like, why would you not want to share a conversation you've had, right? So even when, you know, your email, like from your team, came across my email, I looked at your name and I looked at what you talk about, and I was like, oh yes. I was like, we are having this conversation, and it's going to be so incredible because this is exactly what people need to hear right now. And on
Yeah.
the yeah, right. And then on the flip side of this, I want to ask you, maybe as a final sort of thought here before we dive into the depths of your book, I want you to tell us all about it. You know, when you start making those decisions based out of intuition and your, you know, gut connection, and you really come from this place of being aligned, a lot of the times it changes what you thought would happen in your life, the path you thought your life would take, the people you
Yes.
have in your life who surround you, your friends, your family, even loved ones, whoever. How do you get over? How would you recommend, if someone could take a tangible example from you with them to go from this episode today? How do you get over the fear and the judgment that comes with living your inner truth?
Yes. That's the biggie, right? First, I just want to go back to what you said about how you quote unquote don't prepare. So what that is you're showing up in an open-hearted way to meet your guest or whomever and see what happens, right?
Mm,
To me, that's beautiful. You're coming at it with, you did not prepare. You read a little bit about me. You kind
I
of knew
did.
a little
Yeah.
bit. And so then you come in and you're like, okay, now let's see where the magic happens, right? And that is
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. You're not trying to control the conversation. You know, you want to keep it moving because that's more interesting for people, but you're allowing the flow right there. So
Mm,
just don't be hard on yourself.
I love
Showing
that.
up to allow the flow and be fully present with whomever. I love that. I didn't prepare. I listened to a couple of your podcasts just so I got an idea of your voice. But oh my gosh, I wanted to show up and see what happened, right? So I think that's beautiful. I don't think that's something to
Mm,
worry about. And
thank
then the
you.
second, yeah, and then the second thing is, yes, it takes a lot of courage. I think I say this on a video on my website where when you're being your most authentic self, there are consequences. I said this before too. And when you live within your authentic way of being, the more you do that, the more untenable and uncomfortable it becomes to live outside of that.
Mm,
And that helps with coping with the potential loss of people you think are your friends or think are your partner or think is your job or your workmates. It comes with the potential loss of that because you haven't been honest with them.
mm,
You have not been honest with whomever you're interacting with if you are presenting an inauthentic version of yourself. So once you start to excavate the authentic truth of your being and actually live that in the world, you may lose your partner, your friends, your parents might be pissed or annoyed, whatever it is, or they might now have the invitation and permission to be their own authentic selves.
mm,
And you can meet each other at that level, at that sort of more satisfying, more fulfilling level.
mm-hmm.
But to be your authentic self, you have to be willing to give up the picture of what you think is best for you, what the stories you've told yourself your whole life maybe. Okay, I got to give up that picture. I thought I was always supposed to be a doctor or always supposed to be a lawyer or whatever it is that your parents or you told yourself you were supposed to be, right? You might have to let that go, and there could be a little bit of mourning losing that, right? Okay, that's not my authentic self. You might lose that. You might lose, your parents might think, well, wait a minute, what are you doing? You're going to go chase your dreams to be a, fill in the blank, something that might not make as much money or might be not as prestigious. You're going to go be a writer. You're going to go do this or that. That's not good. Well, I'm following my authentic self. So I'm going to take a little break from those external people who are telling me to not follow my guidance, who are trying to pull
Mm-hmm.
me back. And I have an allegory for this. It's called the ravine. That's also on my website, but it's also in the book. And it's this idea that when you discover you're not being your authentic self, it's like being stuck in the bottom of a mucky, shitty ravine. And you got to get out of there. And you know, if you get to the top of the ravine, it's going to be sunnier and brighter and potentially better. But first, you have to climb these like muddy walls. There's hardly any footholds. You have people who want you to stay in that ravine because they're comfortable with you there. You're comfortable down there, but you just have this intuition, this idea that if you leave those thought patterns, you leave that ravine and get to the top, it's going to be better. And so you might start going up and they pull you back down, or you might start going up and you pull yourself back down. But then you start to notice there's other people trying to get out and you help each other out. And then pretty soon you get to the top and you're like, wait, it is better up here. And then you fall all the way back down, or you fall part way back down. And that's fine. That's great. That's totally fine. But you got a little bit of data. You got to the top at least once and you know it. So now you can trust your intuition a tiny bit more. And then maybe in 3 weeks, you can trust it a tiny bit more. And so it's this idea of, yes, if you are your most authentic self and you feel into that and you live that, there will be consequences. You may not be on the path that you thought you were supposed to be on, but I promise there'll be more contentment, there'll be more ease. And eventually you could even say there could be more happiness and joy because you are living your most authentic self. And when you think about it, it's not only this amazing experience for you personally, it's a gift to everybody, because if you are doing it, that gives permission to everyone around you to also do it. Imagine if they see Simona, oh my God, she's just blazing her trail in her most authentic self. If she can do it, maybe I could consider doing it. And that's this beautiful gift that you're unwittingly giving to every single human around you when you're listening to your own authenticity. And I think that's something people forget. They're afraid of the repercussions, etc. But what about if you stood out of hiding? That might encourage someone else to come out of hiding, right? And that's this awesome, like, effect that can just spread to more and more people. And I'm just going to say one more thing about that. I am a scientist, and writing this book was an entire experience of coming out of hiding, right? Just, I'm thought as a logical person. I've been prized for my brain, but this is how I've lived my life, my entire life. And to come out of hiding and put it in a book form and then talk to people about it in public was this big overcoming fear experience for me and getting out of unproductive grooves, right? And so I empathize with this process of doing things that are scary and coming out of hiding. I fully empathize with it because that's part of this process that I've undergone. And I tell you, it's the best thing ever. When you get to experience your authentic self and present that in the world, it's super scary. You're jumping off a cliff 24 hours a day, but it's actually wonderful because then you discover, oh, wait a minute, there's pillows at the bottom of every single cliff. So it's pretty great.
I love that. Before we dive into your book, I'm going to ask you one quick question. Real quick, yes or no. Could you imagine your life any other way?
No, gosh, no way.
Yeah.
It would be.
I mean, you can elaborate a little bit if you want to.
And I just got, you talk about full body. I just got full body goosebump chills when you said that, because no, it is intolerable. And I promise it will be that way for every single human. Once they start getting in touch with that, it just becomes more and more intolerable and uncomfortable. You don't have a choice. And that's actually kind of great because you just got to do what's authentic. Yeah.
I love this so much. You are such a light in this world to be able to do this work. And I can only imagine the amount of stories you had to comb through in this process for yourself, because I can empathize a little bit with that side. You know, of course, our parents always have visions and things for who we're going to be and how we're going to be in life. And when I left corporate Canada, because I live in Canada, not corporate America, but when I left corporate, I did so. And I remember my mom, she said to me, she's like, I don't know about this, Simona. She's like, I think that, are you sure? Are you really sure? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, how many opportunities do you have in life to really do the thing you want to do? Yes, opportunities don't, if they're meant for you, they don't always pass you by, but sometimes they do, and sometimes you have to take advantage of that particular thing in the moment. Otherwise, you're never going to know, right?
Yeah, and can I just say one more tiny thing about that? Because
please, yes.
That concern from your mom is just her love. It's just love, right? And sometimes we do that by accident with the people we love. We're like, oh my God,
Yes.
if Simona quits her job, she's going to go poor. She's going to be on the streets. And then 3 seconds later, you are homeless and have no money and no food, right? So that's
Exactly.
where that's coming from. It's her fear for her
Exactly.
beloved, beautiful daughter, right? So it's not even, she's not doing anything wrong. She's just, that's her
No.
expression of concern and love for you. And it's a matter of, Mama, I love you. You're amazing. I thank you. I'm going to do this. And, it's
It's
just
gonna be
like,
okay.
yeah, it's going to be what it is,
Exactly.
and it'll be okay. Yeah.
There's two things that I think to myself very often. The first thing, especially when I was transitioning out of my corporate job to, coming out and doing my own business, which has been incredible, by the way. Like I could not imagine anything in my life. It had to be this way. Do you know what I mean? Like I couldn't imagine anything
Yes.
else. The first thing that I was always thinking to myself was, there's things that happen in life. All kinds of situations happen. We can't understand or explain why they happen. But me as a person, innately as a human being, I have never and will never be without. I will always be okay, And then on the flip side of that too, well, not really the flip side, but the second thing that I think to myself often, I actually heard this as like a TikTok thing or Instagram reel or something like that. And the soundbite was, I trust the universe so much that even when things are not okay, I always say that they're okay because they will be okay. It's not the end, it's just a redirection, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
it.
And it's
So,
not
okay, we have a,
magic.
oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I just
Say
gonna say
that
it's
again.
not magic. It's not magic. There's not, everything can be okay because, oh, this has to be in my life because I need it for something. I need to learn something. And
Exactly.
that's not to say that it's suffering's hard and all that stuff. But yeah, it will always be okay. I have the same exact belief. Yeah.
I love that. So,
Mm-hmm.
with the few minutes that we have left together, I would love so much if you could tell our listener today all about your book, where they can find it, and I guess one key takeaway that they could expect by reading it.
It's basically an invitation to do what we've been talking about. So to recognize where you're stuck in those inauthentic, fear-based, and ego-based, unproductive grooves, where you're telling yourself stories that you might be inadequate or unworthy, or you have scarce resources when it's not true, or you're obligated to do things. So it kind of breaks down the voices in your head that talk to you. What is the self-talk? What are some things you can say to yourself instead? How to recognize when you're stuck in those unproductive grooves, and then how to start this practice of finding and trusting and listening to your inner guidance, which we all have. And it just makes the point also that we all have this voice. You can think about so many examples from popular culture that tell us we have that voice, that intuition, or it's in
Mm.
movies, it's in TV shows, it's in books, it's everywhere. This idea of feel the force, Luke, or whatever, it's just everywhere. So it's a universal human condition. So you have it. I'm promising everyone has this. And also, so you have to remember that this book is written by a scientist, me, and so it's very logical. It's not very long, and it's all laid out in this kind of familiar way, so you can kind of flip to a chapter, find what information you need pretty quickly, get that piece of information, and then go forward. And it's also peppered with some stories, some fictionalized and stories of experiences that help to illustrate what I'm even talking about. What does it mean to find your guidance? What does that feel like? What's an example of a person who is stuck in an unproductive groove, and how do they get out of it? And so those stories are sort of interspersed throughout to kind of help give examples of how to move forward. Because I find when I teach evolutionary ecology, you need examples to anchor these thoughts to, or else it's just
Yeah.
too hard to wrap your mind around it. So that's
Yeah.
that's sort of the book in a nutshell. And there's also a lot of love and joy and acceptance and just empathy and just pure love in that book. Like anyone
That's
who reads it, I
exciting.
hope they feel the love I feel for
Well,
them specifically, and humanity in general. Yeah.
I'm so excited to read the book. It's going to be, I hope, a game changer in the way that you can find like actual tangible ways to implement in your life,
Yeah, and
Um,
and you said something. You said one more thing a little bit earlier. We have all these messages and these voices and how they come through. And you said something about different voices, and this message is not new. This is not a new message. This is in Zen. This is in Christianity. This isn't all over the place. This is in yoga practice. Listen to
mhm.
your authenticity. But this is that same message written through the lens of Carolyn Kurle, right? So it came through this body, this personality, this form who has this many years of training in this field. And so it's the same message, but perhaps someone could hear it when they couldn't hear the message when it came through someone else. So that's all it is too. It's just another offering of many offerings that invite us to be our authentic selves. And if you can hear the way it came through my personality, great. Does that make sense? Like, it's no different from the stuff your other guests have said or you believe or say. It's just now this book is now the guidance groove in my voice, but it came through from the same source that all truth and goodness comes through, right? So
exactly.
that's all. So
I love that. So, and you know, what's really, you know, a very good point to like highlight is a lot of the times information really isn't new, you know what I mean? But everyone's, like we've been talking about this whole conversation, everyone's lived experience puts a different view, a different twist, and a different layer to what's already existing, which makes it even more profound, which allows it, like you're saying, to hit at a different point when it needs to. Okay, Dr. Carolyn, this has been such an amazing conversation. I've loved it so much. I would love if you could tell our listeners where they can find you before I ask you my last question.
So sure, you can go to theguidancegroove.com or you can just Google me. I'm Carolyn Kurle. It's Kurle. It's spelled funny, but it's pronounced Curly. And there's no other Carolyn Kurles, and you'll find easily. And you can send me a note on my website, that guidancegroove.com website, and then I can let you know when the book is out so you can get it off Amazon or wherever. So yeah, that's that.
Amazing. Perfect. We'll put all of those links in the show notes so that our listener can connect with you and can grab your book and check all of the amazing things.
I am on LinkedIn if anyone wants to connect. I connect with everyone. If you contact me on LinkedIn,
I'll be connecting with you.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely.
I love it. That's awesome. Okay, my last question for you, and this is a question that I have been asking pretty much for 3 years, which is unbelievable. And every single time I ask it, I get a different answer, naturally. And this question is, how can someone create a little bit more happiness in their day every day starting today?
Find your authentic voice and love it and trust it and live by it. Stop ignoring it. Just bring it into your full presence. And then you can be happy as you live life from a place of wholeness.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was lovely.
This was really fun. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into this episode on the Happiness Happens podcast. If you love this conversation, be sure to connect with both of us. Let us know that you're listening and what you took away from the conversation the most. Be sure to share it with someone who also needs to hear this message. And remember that happiness happens when you're least expecting it.